Cathvar stood before the great assembly hall of the Galactic Council. His blue skin had lost its shine over the years, and his forearms trembled slightly as he approached the speaking platform. The other delegates watched him with curious eyes. Some were old allies of the Zephyrian collective. Others were enemies who had fought against his people. But today they all wanted to hear the same thing. They wanted to know about the humans. "I am Cathvar of the 7th Fleet," he began, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "I served as intelligence officer for 43 cycles before the war. I have seen battles across 7 star systems. I have studied the warfare patterns of 26 different species. But nothing prepared me for what I witnessed when we first encountered the humans." The chamber fell silent. Even the usual whispers stopped. Everyone knew this story would be different. Cathvar's memory drifted back to that day 15 cycles ago. The Zephyrian collective had been expanding for centuries. Their technology was advanced, their fleets were powerful, and their methods were efficient. When they found a new species, the process was always the same. They would demonstrate their superior firepower, demand surrender, and then integrate the new species into their empire. It had worked with dozens of civilizations. The humans were supposed to be easy. Their planet, called Earth, was on the edge of known space. Intelligence reports showed they had barely left their own solar system. They used primitive chemical rockets and basic nuclear technology. Their weapons were crude metal projectiles and simple explosives. By galactic standards, they were practically Stone Age creatures. "We expected them to surrender immediately," Cathvar continued. "Our ships were faster, our shields were stronger, and our weapons could destroy their largest cities in minutes. When we arrived at their system, we sent the standard ultimatum: surrender now, or face destruction." The human response had puzzled everyone on the Zephyrian command ship. Instead of immediate surrender or desperate pleas for mercy, the humans had simply said, "We refuse." Not, "Please don't hurt us," or "We need time to consider," just "We refuse." Fleet Commander Veltar had laughed at the response. He ordered a demonstration of power, destroying an empty moon to show the humans what they faced. Surely they would understand now. The humans responded by attacking. Their ships were pathetic, Cathvar told the assembly. Slow metal boxes with primitive engines. "We destroyed the first wave in minutes. Then came the second wave. And the third." They kept coming, even though they had no chance of victory. But something strange happened during those first battles. The human ships, while still primitive, were different each time. The second wave had better armor. The third wave had improved weapons. By the fourth wave, they were using tactics the Zephyrians had never seen before. "We learned later that humans have something they call reverse engineering," Cathvar explained. "They can look at our technology and figure out how it works, but they don't just copy it. They improve it. They make it better suited for their needs." The first sign of real trouble came when a human ship managed to damage a Zephyrian cruiser. The damage was minor, but it should have been impossible. The human weapons were too weak to penetrate Zephyrian shields, except the humans hadn't used normal weapons. They had somehow modified their primitive missiles to carry a device that disrupted shield generators. It was crude and inefficient, but it worked. Where did they get shield disruptor technology? Fleet Commander Veltar had demanded. The answer was disturbing. The humans had built it themselves, using data they gathered from scanning Zephyrian ships during previous battles. In just 3 weeks, they had gone from not knowing shields existed to building weapons that could defeat them. The war that was supposed to last days stretched into months. The humans kept adapting, kept learning, kept improving. Their ships got better. Their tactics became more clever. Their weapons became more dangerous. "We destroyed their space stations," Cathvar remembered, "but they rebuilt them with better defenses. We attacked their shipyards, but they moved production to hidden locations. We tried to blockade their planet, but they had already spread to other worlds in their system." The most frightening thing was how quickly humans learned from their mistakes. Other species might repeat failed tactics for cycles before changing approach. Humans seemed to learn from every single battle. If a tactic failed once, they never used it again. If a tactic worked, they found ways to make it work better. 3 months into what should have been a quick conquest, Cathvar made a discovery that changed everything. While analyzing captured human equipment, he found something impossible. The humans had not just reverse-engineered Zephyrian technology. They had improved it. Their version of our plasma cannons were 30% more efficient, he told the assembly. Their hull materials were stronger than ours. Their computers processed data faster. They had taken our technology and made it better. Fleet Commander Veltar refused to believe it at first. How could a primitive species improve upon technology that had taken the Zephyrians centuries to develop? The answer came during the final battle of the first phase. The humans launched what appeared to be a desperate last attack. Hundreds of their ships charged the Zephyrian fleet in a chaotic formation that made no tactical sense. It was a trap. The human ships were equipped with new weapons we had never seen. Kethvar continued. Energy beams that could cut through our strongest armor. Missiles that could think for themselves and avoid our defenses. Shields that could adapt to our weapons in real time. The Zephyrian fleet, which had seemed invincible just months before, was torn apart in hours. Ship after ship fell to human weapons that shouldn't have existed. Kethvar's own vessel barely escaped, its hull cracked and its engines failing. As they retreated, Kethvar watched the human ships through his scanner. They weren't celebrating their victory. They were already salvaging the wreckage, studying the destroyed Zephyrian vessels, learning even more. We had awakened something terrible, Kethvar said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. We thought we were conquering a primitive species. Instead, we had given them a reason to become something far more dangerous than we had ever imagined. The retreat back to Zephyrian space took weeks. During that time, Kethvar wrote report after report, trying to explain what had happened. How could humans advance so quickly? How could they turn defeat into victory so consistently? His commanders didn't believe him at first. The report seemed impossible. No species could develop technology that fast. No military could adapt tactics that quickly. No civilization could mobilize resources that efficiently, but the evidence was undeniable. The humans had not just survived the first Zephyrian attack, they had grown stronger because of it. When I finished my first report, Kethvar told the assembly, I recommended immediate withdrawal from human space. I suggested we leave them alone and pretend we had never found them. The recommendation was rejected. The Zephyrian High Command decided that humans were too dangerous to ignore. They would send a larger fleet with better ships and more experienced crews. They would crush the human resistance before it could grow any stronger. Kethvar looked around the assembly hall, seeing the faces of delegates from dozens of species. Many of them had made the same mistake his people had made. They had underestimated humanity. That was our first mistake, he said, attacking the humans. Our second mistake was even worse. We decided to try again. 6 months after the first defeat, Kethvar found himself back in human space. This time he was part of the second expedition, a massive fleet of 300 ships carrying the most advanced weapons the Zephyrian collective could build. The High Command had learned from the first encounter. They brought overwhelming force, better shields, and new tactics designed specifically to counter human adaptability. They were confident this would be the end of human resistance. Kethvar was not so sure. During the long journey to Earth, he had studied every piece of data from the first expedition. The humans had not just defeated a Zephyrian fleet. They had done it while learning and improving throughout the entire conflict. If they could advance that much in just a few months of fighting, what could they accomplish in 6 months of preparation? The answer became clear as soon as the second expedition entered the human solar system. Everything had changed. Where we had previously found scattered space stations and primitive mining operations, Kethvar told the assembled delegates, we now discovered a fortress system. Every asteroid had been turned into a weapons platform. Every moon carried missile batteries. Every planet bristled with defenses we could barely comprehend. The humans had not wasted their time after the first battle. While the Zephyrians spent months planning their return, the humans had been building. But they hadn't just built more of the same primitive technology. They had created something entirely new. Human cargo ships, once simple transport vessels, now carried fighters and bombers. Mining stations had become weapon factories. Even civilian settlements were protected by shields and guns that rivaled military installations. Fleet Commander Veltar, promoted after the first expedition despite the defeat, ordered an immediate attack on the nearest human outpost. It looked like a simple research station, the kind of target that should fall within minutes. The station fought back. It was equipped with weapons that could reach across the entire system, Kethvar remembered. Energy beams that stayed focused across millions of kilometers. Missiles that could accelerate for days without losing target lock. defense fields that could deflect our strongest attacks. The simple research station held off 30 Zephyrian warships for 6 hours before finally being destroyed, and even in destruction it provided valuable data to other human positions. We learned that every human installation was connected to every other installation, Keithavar explained. They shared information instantly across impossible distances. When we destroyed one position, all the others immediately learned our capabilities and adapted their defenses. This was something the Zephyrians had never encountered before. Most species fought with individual ships and isolated bases. Coordination was limited by communication delays and command structures. But humans seemed to think and fight as one vast organism. The second day of fighting brought an even greater shock. As the Zephyrian fleet advanced toward Earth, human ships began appearing behind them. Not ships from hidden bases, but vessels that had somehow traveled faster than the Zephyrian fleet itself. Impossible, Fleet Commander Veltar had declared. Our engines are the fastest in the galaxy. But the evidence was undeniable. Human ships were now faster than Zephyrian ships. Not just a little faster, but significantly faster. They could appear anywhere in the system within hours, strike hard, and disappear before retaliation could arrive. Keithavar later learned how they had done it. The humans had studied captured Zephyrian engine technology and discovered a way to improve it. They used a technique called overdriving that pushed engines beyond safe limits. It was dangerous and shortened the engine's lifespan, but it worked. Most species would never risk such modifications, Keithavar told the assembly. The chance of engine failure was nearly 50%, but humans seemed willing to accept those odds if it gave them an advantage. The human approach to risk was unlike anything in Zephyrian experience. Where other species calculated acceptable losses in single-digit percentages, humans planned operations that might destroy half their forces if they achieved their objectives. And somehow, it worked. Human attack squadrons would charge into Zephyrian formations, knowing that many of their ships would be destroyed, but confident that the survivors would inflict enough damage to justify the sacrifice. They fought with a combination of careful planning and reckless courage that made them impossible to predict. Their tactics made no sense, Keithavar continued. They would sacrifice expensive warships to destroy our supply convoys. They would risk their best pilots on missions that seemed pointless. They would abandon strategic positions to launch attacks that appeared to have no military value. But every seemingly pointless attack served a purpose. The humans were not just fighting to win individual battles. They were fighting to learn more about Zephyrian capabilities. Every engagement, every sacrifice, every defeat taught them something new. The human learning curve was terrifying. Tactics that worked against them once never worked again. Weapons that surprised them in one battle were countered in the next. Technology that gave the Zephyrians an advantage was reverse-engineered and improved within weeks. On the 15th day of fighting, Keithavar remembered, we encountered human ships equipped with our own weapons. Not copies of our weapons, but actual Zephyrian plasma cannons and shield generators. They had somehow captured our technology without us knowing about it. The mystery was solved when Zephyrian engineers examined the wreckage of destroyed human ships. Hidden among the debris were tiny devices, no larger than a Zephyrian thumb, that could record and transmit detailed scans of any technology they encountered. The humans had been planting these devices on Zephyrian ships since the first battle. Every engagement had been a data-gathering operation. While the Zephyrians focused on destroying human ships, the humans were studying Zephyrian ships. They turned every battle into a learning experience, Keithavar explained. Winning or losing was less important than gathering information. They were fighting a different kind of war than we understood. The realization came too late. By the time the Zephyrian fleet recognized what was happening, human ships were equipped with improved versions of every major Zephyrian technology. Their weapons were more powerful, their shields were stronger, and their engines were faster. The final engagement of the second expedition lasted 3 days. Human forces attacked from all directions, using tactics that seemed to anticipate every Zephyrian move. They had studied Zephyrian combat doctrine so thoroughly that they could predict responses before orders were given. Fleet Commander Veltar fought bravely, but he was fighting an enemy that knew his tactics better than he did. Human ships appeared where they should not have been able to reach. Human weapons targeted weak points that should have been secret. Human strategies countered Zephyrian moves that had not yet been made. We were not just outfought, Keithavar told the assembly. We were outsmarted by an enemy that had turned our own knowledge against us. The retreat was chaotic and humiliating. The great Zephyrian fleet pride of the collective was broken and scattered. More than half the ships were destroyed or captured. The survivors limped home with damaged hulls and shattered confidence. Kethvar's ship was among the last to escape. As they fled the human system, he watched human vessels pursuing them to the edge of their territory. But the humans did not follow beyond their borders. They simply watched the Zephyrians leave, gathering data even in victory. They were not interested in conquest. Kethvar realized. They were interested in learning. Every attack we made taught them more about galactic civilization, galactic technology, and galactic warfare. The humans had used the Zephyrian expeditions as a training program. They had allowed themselves to be invaded in order to learn everything they could about their potential enemies. And now they knew more about Zephyrian capabilities than most Zephyrian officers. As his damaged ship crossed into Zephyrian space, Kethvar began writing his second report. This time he had a different recommendation. "Do not send another fleet," he wrote. "Do not attempt another attack. The humans are no longer the primitive species we first encountered. They have become something far more dangerous. They have become students of war itself." But once again his warnings were ignored. 2 years passed before Kethvar saw humans again. This time he was not part of an invasion force. He was part of a diplomatic mission, sent to negotiate with species that had begun forming alliances with humanity. The Zephyrian High Command had finally realized that direct military action was not working. They would try a different approach. They would isolate humanity by turning the galaxy against them. The plan seemed reasonable. Humans were still new to galactic civilization. They had few allies and limited resources. If other species could be convinced that humanity was a threat to galactic peace, the humans could be contained without direct confrontation. But when Kethvar arrived at the neutral station where negotiations were taking place, he discovered that the galaxy had already changed in ways the Zephyrian leadership had not anticipated. Human ships were everywhere. Not warships, Kethvar told the assembly, but cargo vessels, passenger transports, and survey ships. Hundreds of them, carrying thousands of humans to dozens of worlds. In just 2 years, they had spread across half the galaxy. The humans were not expanding as conquerors. They were expanding as traders, explorers, and settlers. They offered advanced technology in exchange for resources, knowledge, and friendship. Species that had never heard of humanity 6 months earlier were now hosting human colonies and research stations. Kethvar spent weeks at the diplomatic station, observing human behavior and trying to understand their strategy. What he learned disturbed him more than any military defeat. The humans were not just spreading across the galaxy. They were studying it. Every human merchant was also a researcher, gathering data about alien cultures, technologies, and military capabilities. Every human diplomat was also an intelligence officer, mapping political relationships and potential conflicts. Every human settler was also a scout, identifying resources and strategic positions. They had turned peaceful expansion into military reconnaissance, Kethvar explained. While we saw traders and explorers, they were actually building the foundation for galactic warfare. But the most frightening discovery came when Kethvar examined human industrial capabilities. The humans had not just spread across the galaxy. They had brought their entire civilization with them. Human colonies were not simple outposts dependent on Earth for supplies. They were complete industrial systems capable of producing everything from basic tools to advanced starships. Each human world could support itself indefinitely, and more importantly, each human world could support others. We learned that humans had something they called redundant infrastructure, Kethvar continued. Every critical system existed in multiple locations. Every important technology could be produced by multiple facilities. Every strategic resource had multiple sources. This meant that attacking human positions was almost pointless. Destroying one facility simply caused production to shift to another. Capturing one system only reduced human capabilities by a tiny percentage. The humans had created a civilization that could survive massive damage and continue functioning. But the industrial capacity was only part of the horror. The real nightmare was how humans used their industries during wartime. When the third expedition was launched, 18 months after the diplomatic initiatives began, the Zephyrians expected to find a scattered human presence they could defeat in detail. Instead, they found an entire civilization that had been preparing for war since the day the first Zephyrian ship had appeared in their system. Kethvar was not part of the third expedition, but he received detailed reports from the few survivors. What they described was beyond anything the Zephyrians had imagined possible. Every human facility had been militarized, he told the assembly. Factories that produced civilian goods could switch to weapons production within days. Research stations studying peaceful sciences immediately began developing military applications. Even entertainment facilities were converted to training centers and propaganda operations. The humans had not just prepared for war. They had transformed their entire species into a war machine. Human children learned mathematics by calculating missile trajectories. Human artists created works that inspired military recruitment. Human scientists competed to develop the most effective weapons. Human entertainers produced shows that taught combat tactics while appearing to be simple stories. It was not military preparation, Kethvar explained. It was cultural evolution. They had changed themselves into a species that existed for warfare. The third expedition faced human forces that seemed to anticipate every possible attack. Human defenses were perfectly positioned to counter Zephyrian tactics. Human weapons were specifically designed to exploit Zephyrian weaknesses. Human strategies accounted for every variable the Zephyrians might introduce. But the most disturbing aspect was how humans treated their own casualties. Other species mourned their losses and tried to minimize casualties. Humans studied their casualties and tried to make them more effective. They performed what they called post-action analysis on every engagement, Kethvar said. They examined why each ship was destroyed, why each tactic failed, why each weapon missed its target. Then they used that information to improve their performance in the next battle. Human commanders did not just accept losses as inevitable. They planned losses as useful. They would deliberately sacrifice units to gather intelligence about enemy capabilities. They would allow positions to be overrun to learn about enemy tactics. They would lose battles to win wars. The psychological impact on Zephyrian forces was devastating. Fighting an enemy that learned from every defeat was bad enough. Fighting an enemy that seemed to benefit from their own casualties was impossible to comprehend. Human soldiers fought differently than any other species, Kethvar remembered. They were not trying to survive the battle. They were trying to make the battle useful for humanity. Each death was data. Each defeat was education. The third expedition lasted 6 months and ended in complete disaster. Not just military disaster, but psychological disaster. The surviving Zephyrian officers could not explain what they had experienced. How do you fight an enemy that becomes stronger every time you hurt them? But humans had learned something far more important than military tactics during the third expedition. They had learned about galactic civilization itself. We discovered that humans had been recording every communication, analyzing every diplomatic exchange and mapping every political relationship in the galaxy, Kethvar continued. They knew more about galactic politics than most species knew about their own governments. The humans had identified every potential ally, every possible enemy, and every strategic resource in known space. They had calculated the probable outcomes of hundreds of different conflict scenarios. They had prepared contingency plans for wars that had not yet begun. They were not just fighting the Zephyrian collective, Kethvar realized. They were preparing to fight everyone. The fourth expedition never launched. Before it could be organized, human diplomats made contact with the Zephyrian High Command directly. They did not come to surrender or negotiate peace. They came to deliver a message. The message was simple and terrifying. We know everything about you. We can destroy you whenever we choose, but we prefer to be friends. Along with the message, the humans provided detailed intelligence about Zephyrian military capabilities, political structures, and economic systems. Information that should have been impossible for them to obtain. Information that proved they could strike at the heart of the Zephyrian collective whenever they decided to do so. They had spent 4 years studying us, Kethvar told the assembly. While we were trying to conquer them, they were learning everything about our civilization. They knew our weaknesses better than we did. The humans offered a choice. The Zephyrians could continue the war and face complete destruction, or they could accept human terms for peace. The terms were surprisingly generous. Humans wanted trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and mutual defense pacts. They were offering friendship to the species that had tried to destroy them, but the offer came with an unspoken understanding. The humans had become something that could not be defeated by conventional means. They had turned warfare itself into a tool for growth and learning. Every attack made them stronger. Every enemy taught them more. We had created our own nightmare, Kethvar said quietly. We had wanted to conquer a primitive species. Instead, we had trained them to conquer the galaxy. The galactic response to human expansion was swift and predictable. 3 major powers formed the coalition of concerned species within months of learning about human military capabilities. The hegemony of worlds, the United Stellar Federation, and the Empire of 1,000 Suns all agreed that humanity represented an existential threat to galactic civilization. Kethvar was assigned as a liaison officer to the coalition, tasked with sharing Zephyrian intelligence about human warfare capabilities. It should have been a straightforward assignment: share what they knew about human tactics, help coordinate a joint response, and finally contain the human threat. Instead, it became a front-row seat to watch humanity demonstrate why they were truly terrifying. The coalition assembled the largest military force in galactic history, Kethvar told the assembly. 15,000 ships from 23 different species, weapons technology from a dozen civilizations, command structures that had been proven in hundreds of conflicts. It was an army that could have conquered half the galaxy. The coalition's strategy was sophisticated and comprehensive. Rather than repeat Zephyrian mistakes, they would attack on multiple fronts simultaneously. Human expansion would be contained while their home systems were destroyed. It was a plan that accounted for human adaptability, human industrial capacity, and human learning ability. It was also exactly what the humans had been expecting. The first sign that something was wrong came during the coalition's initial planning phase. Intelligence reports about human positions kept changing. Bases that existed one week were gone the next. New installations appeared overnight in systems that had been empty for centuries. We thought humans were simply relocating assets to avoid our attacks, Kethvar explained. We did not realize they were using our own intelligence networks against us. The humans had infiltrated coalition communications from the beginning. Not through advanced technology or clever hacking, but through something far more disturbing. They had people on the inside. Human agents had been discovered in 17 different coalition species. Not recent recruits or paid informants, but individuals who had been posing as loyal citizens for years. Some had undergone surgical modification to appear completely alien. Others had been raised from childhood to believe they were members of other species. The psychological evaluation reports were terrifying, Kethvar remembered. These humans believed they were hegemony citizens or Federation officers. They had convinced themselves so completely that they passed every security screening and loyalty test. The infiltration was not random. Every human agent had been placed in positions where they could access critical military information. Communication systems, supply networks, command structures, and strategic planning departments all contained human sleeper agents. But the infiltration went deeper than espionage. Some human agents had been in position for so long that they had risen to positions of significant authority. A Federation admiral who had commanded fleets for 15 years was revealed to be human. A hegemony trade minister who controlled resource allocation turned out to be a human operative. We learned that humans had been preparing for galactic warfare since before we first met them, Kethvar continued. They had sent advanced scouts to study alien civilizations decades before first contact. They were already fighting a war we did not know existed. The coalition's grand strategy collapsed before the first battle began. Humans knew every planned attack, every troop movement, every tactical decision. They had been reading coalition communications in real time for months. When the coalition finally launched their coordinated assault, they found empty space where human bases should have been. The humans had evacuated every position the coalition planned to attack and had relocated their assets to systems the coalition did not know existed. The humans had built a hidden civilization, Kethvar explained. Secret bases in unexplored systems, concealed industrial facilities in empty space, camouflaged research stations inside asteroid fields. While we watched their official territories, they had been building a shadow empire. The coalition found themselves attacking decoy targets, while the real human forces struck at their supply lines, communication networks, and support systems. It was not a traditional battle between opposing fleets. It was a systematic dismantling of everything that allowed the coalition to function as a military force. Human attacks were precisely targeted to cause maximum disruption with minimum casualties. They destroyed fuel depots rather than warships, severed communication links rather than command centers, and captured supply convoys rather than killing their crews. They were not trying to destroy us, Kethvar realized. They were trying to study us. Every coalition species had different technologies, different tactics, and different weaknesses. By fighting all of them simultaneously, humans could learn everything about galactic military science in a fraction of the time it would take to study each species individually. The war became a horrifying educational experience for humanity. Each coalition attack taught them about new weapons, new defenses, and new strategies. Each captured ship provided new technology to reverse engineer and improve. Each interrogated prisoner revealed new information about galactic civilization. We were not fighting a war, Kethvar told the assembly. We were providing a comprehensive education in galactic warfare to the most dangerous students in the universe. The humans demonstrated an ability to learn and adapt that defied every known principle of military science. Tactics that worked against them once were immediately countered. Technology that surprised them in one battle was improved and used against its creators in the next. Strategies that took other species decades to develop were mastered by humans in weeks. But the most disturbing discovery was how humans used their prisoners of war. Coalition personnel who were captured expected imprisonment, interrogation, or execution. Instead, they found themselves in what humans called cultural exchange programs. Human prisoner facilities were unlike anything we had ever seen, Kethvar explained. Captives were housed in comfortable conditions and treated with respect. They were encouraged to teach humans about their cultures, their technologies, and their military doctrines. Many prisoners volunteered to cooperate, believing they were participating in diplomatic exchanges rather than military intelligence operations. Humans were skilled at making interrogation feel like friendly conversation. They asked questions about family, culture, and history that seemed innocent but revealed critical information about alien psychology and social structures. Some prisoners became willing collaborators, convinced that humans were misunderstood rather than dangerous. They returned to their home systems carrying human propaganda disguised as personal observations. They spoke of human kindness, human curiosity, and human desire for peace. The humans had weaponized friendship, Kethvar said. They turned our own compassion and social instincts against us. The coalition war effort began to fracture as species started questioning whether humans were really the threat they had believed. Human psychological warfare was subtle and effective, creating doubt about coalition goals and methods while presenting humanity as a peaceful species forced to defend itself against aggressive aliens. Within 18 months, 3 coalition species had withdrawn from the alliance. Within 2 years, 2 more had begun secret negotiations with human representatives. The Grand Alliance against humanity collapsed not through military defeat, but through political manipulation. The humans had learned that destroying enemies was less useful than converting them, Kethvar continued. Dead enemies provided no ongoing benefits. Living friends provided resources, information, and opportunities for further expansion. The final phase of the coalition war demonstrated human strategic thinking at its most sophisticated. Rather than simply defeating their enemies, humans had identified which species could be turned into allies and which needed to be neutralized. Permanently, species that showed potential for cooperation found themselves facing limited human military action combined with generous offers of technological exchange and cultural partnership. Species that remained hostile discovered that human forces could appear anywhere in their territory at any time, striking at critical targets before vanishing back into hidden bases. By the end of the coalition war, Kethvar told the assembly, humans had not conquered the galaxy. They had reorganized it. Species that had been enemies for centuries were working together in human-mediated alliances. Trade networks that had never existed before were carrying human goods to every corner of known space. The humans had won more than a military victory. They had demonstrated that they could manipulate galactic civilization itself, turning conflicts into opportunities and enemies into assets. And throughout the entire process, they had continued learning, growing, and preparing for whatever challenges might come next. Kethvar paused in his testimony, looking around the assembly hall at the faces of delegates from across the galaxy. Representatives of species that had fought humans, species that had allied with them, and species that were still trying to understand what humanity meant for galactic civilization. 10 years had passed since the end of the Coalition War. 10 years of what humans called peace. But Kethvar knew better than anyone that peace was unlike any other species' concept of peace. The war ended not because anyone defeated the humans, he continued, but because humanity achieved everything they wanted to achieve. They had proven they could not be conquered. They had established themselves as a major galactic power. They had gained access to technologies and knowledge from dozens of civilizations. Most importantly, they had earned something they called respect. The peace treaty negotiations had been unlike anything in galactic diplomatic history. Usually, peace talks involved careful bargaining between exhausted enemies. Both sides would make concessions, establish boundaries, and agree to limitations on future military activities. The humans had made no concessions. Instead, they had presented what they called mutual cooperation agreements to every species they had fought. The agreements offered generous terms, technology sharing, cultural exchanges, trade partnerships, and mutual defense pacts. But buried within the complex diplomatic language was a simple message: accept our friendship or face the consequences. Most species signed immediately, Kethvar explained. They had seen what humans were capable of during the war. They understood that continued hostility would mean eventual destruction. But signing the agreements was only the beginning. The humans had spent years studying galactic civilization, and they used that knowledge to reshape it according to their own vision. Human trade networks connected species that had never communicated before. Human diplomatic initiatives resolved conflicts that had lasted for centuries. Human technological innovations improved life for billions of beings across the galaxy. On the surface, it appeared that humans were being generous neighbors, Kethvar said. But every human action served multiple purposes. Every trade agreement gathered intelligence. Every diplomatic mission established strategic relationships. Every technological gift created dependencies. The humans were not just participating in galactic civilization. They were gradually taking control of it. The transformation was subtle but comprehensive. Human standards became galactic standards. Human protocols were adopted by other species' militaries. Human languages became essential for interspecies communication. Human educational systems were implemented across dozens of worlds. Within 5 years of the peace treaties, Kethvar continued, it was impossible to function in galactic society without understanding human culture, human technology, and human methods. But the most significant change was in how other species approached warfare itself. The human demonstration of total war had fundamentally altered military thinking across the galaxy. Traditional galactic conflicts had been limited affairs. Professional militaries fought according to established rules while civilian populations remained largely uninvolved. Wars had clear objectives, defined battlefields, and acceptable casualty levels. Humans had proven that such limitations were artificial and unnecessary. Every species now studies human military doctrine, Kethvar told the assembly. Military academies across the galaxy teach courses on human tactics. Officers who want to advance their careers must understand human strategic thinking. Even species that never fought humans have reorganized their armed forces according to human principles. The concept of total war had become standard military policy. Entire civilizations could now be mobilized for conflict. Industrial capacity was treated as a weapon. Civilian populations were considered legitimate targets. Wars were fought not just to achieve specific objectives, but to completely destroy an enemy's ability to resist. Humans had changed the rules of warfare, Kethvar explained. They had made galaxy-wide conflicts possible in ways that had never existed before. The irony was that this new capability made actual warfare less likely. When every species possessed the ability to destroy entire civilizations, direct conflict became too dangerous to risk. Instead, competition moved to economic, diplomatic, and technological arenas where humans held significant advantages. The humans had created a galaxy where war was both more terrible and more unlikely than ever before, Kethvar observed. They had achieved peace through the threat of total destruction, but human influence extended beyond military matters. Human concepts of individual rights, representative government, and economic freedom had spread throughout galactic civilization. Species that had never questioned authoritarian rule found themselves adopting democratic institutions. Economies that had remained static for centuries began embracing innovation and competition. Some species called it liberation, Kethvar said. Others called it cultural imperialism, but everyone agreed that human ideas were changing galactic society in fundamental ways. The humans themselves seemed genuinely surprised by their impact. In their view, they were simply sharing concepts that any intelligent species should naturally develop. They could not understand why other civilizations had not discovered democracy, capitalism, and individual liberty on their own. Human arrogance was perhaps their most dangerous characteristic, Kethvar continued. They believed their way of life was obviously superior and could not comprehend why other species might prefer different systems. This attitude led to what humans called development assistance programs and what others called cultural conversion campaigns. Human advisors worked with alien governments to implement human-style reforms. Human educators taught alien children about human values. Human entrepreneurs established human-style businesses throughout the galaxy. The humans were not conquering other species, Kethvar explained. They were converting them. The process was gradual and often voluntary. Species that adopted human methods found themselves more prosperous, more secure, and more influential in galactic affairs. Species that resisted human influence found themselves increasingly isolated and obsolete. Within 10 years, Kethvar said, it became clear that the galaxy had two types of civilization, those that had embraced human methods and those that were still deciding whether to do so. The humans had achieved something that no conqueror in galactic history had ever accomplished. They had made their own defeat impossible by making their success beneficial to everyone else. But Kethvar had spent decades studying human behavior, and he had noticed something that other observers had missed. Humans were not satisfied with their current position. They were still learning, still growing, still preparing for challenges that did not yet exist. Human exploration fleets probe the edge of known space, he told the assembly. Human research stations study phenomena that have no apparent practical applications. Human educational systems prepare young humans for scenarios that seem purely theoretical. The humans were acting as if galactic civilization was just the beginning, as if the galaxy itself was merely a training ground for something larger. I have studied human literature, human entertainment, and human educational materials, Kethvar continued. Humans dream of traveling to other galaxies, of encountering civilizations beyond our current understanding, of challenges that will test everything they have learned. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. If humans could transform galactic civilization in just a few decades, what could they accomplish given centuries or millennia? What would they become when they encountered truly alien intelligences in distant galaxies? My recommendation to this assembly is simple, Kethvar concluded. Accept human leadership gracefully, learn from human methods willingly, cooperate with human initiatives enthusiastically, because the alternative is not defeat or conquest. The alternative is irrelevance. He looked around the assembly hall one final time, seeing the faces of delegates who represented thousands of species and trillions of beings. Humanity is not our enemy, he said quietly. Humanity is our future. They have shown us what intelligence can accomplish when it is focused on growth rather than maintenance, on possibility rather than tradition, on adaptation rather than stability. The war taught us that humans cannot be stopped. The peace has taught us that humans should not be stopped. They are what we all have the potential to become if we are willing to embrace change rather than fear it. Kethvar stepped down from the speaking platform, his testimony complete. The assembly hall remained silent for several minutes as delegates considered what they had heard. Finally, the session was adjourned, and representatives began the long journey back to their home systems. Each carried with them the same message: adapt to the human galaxy or be left behind by it. The age of humanity had begun, and there was no going back.